And Matt, it's good that you're already sitting down for this when I tell you this. They put together a 17 play, 88-yard drive that ends with a 1-yard touchdown run from Mark Ingram. Just gorgeous to read from a box score. Welcome back to Beat Everyone. I am Ben Flanagan with AL.com, and you know what time it is. We're back for yet another edition of the series, Alabama football's best 15 games of the 21st century. We're counting down from 15 to 1. It's been a fun look back at some of the all-time great games of our lifetime, and it's number 6 today. We're narrowing it down. We're getting to the ultimate, best, most awesome, most thrilling games of the last 25 years. We think you'll agree with everything that we say and everything that we pick, but our pick for the 6th best game of the 21st century is Alabama versus Florida in 2009, the SEC championship game. Tebow, 2009, Urban Meyer, Nick Saban, Mark Ingram, Greg McElroy, Rolando McClain, Aaron Hernandez, other people that you might be familiar with, a lot of stars, a lot of NFL talent, just a game that everybody thought was going to be an instant classic, number 1 versus number 2. We're going to break it all down because we know Alabama fans, this is one that you look back on rather fondly. And helping me to do this, as usual, is our good friend, Beat Everyone producer, Matt Scalisi. Matt, how are you today?
Happy to talk about this one, Ben. This one honestly could have gone higher, and I think if this list was the most important wins for Alabama, this would be probably very near the top. This is, I mean, at the time and even in retrospect, this one really feels like kind of a moment that the dam broke for Alabama.
A turning point, to say the least, a moment, a sea change, like you could feel the earth moving here in college football. And, you know, we'll get into so many reasons why it was a true passing of the torch. But Matt, I mean, could you feel it during the 2009 season? I mean, obviously in 2008, they have the undefeated regular season. They fall short in this game against Florida, not quite ready yet, but in 2009, a lot of those guys are back. The 08 class is developing. The 09 class is fantastic. Like, could you feel that this is a team that can win it all now?
I think that there was, it was a very, I mean, look, 2008, which we've talked about on here, was a shift in mindset from feeling like underdogs for many years up to that point to, I think, over the course of that season and getting into 2009 now, it's a different mentality. It is getting used to the fact that you're expected to beat everybody, that you're crushing everybody while you're doing it. And if you go back to, that 2009 season, there are a couple of dramatic games, but not a ton. And for the most part, it was Alabama kind of expecting to win those games, holding serve. There were a few that they needed to get over the hump a little bit. And I think LSU felt like a big deal that year, as it did for, kind of a long stretch at that time in history. The South Carolina game was obviously a big deal in as much as it kind of established that Alabama's offense was always going to find a way, even if you took something crucial away from them. But I still feel like this game was always looming. Preseason, I think there was already discussion about an Alabama-Florida rematch in the SEC championship, and could Alabama ever get over this hump? This was the big barrier they had to break through. And, I think you're always going to find differing opinions in the fan base, but I think there was a lot of uncertainty going into this game. There was belief that this was a very good team. The question is, could they finally get past that one thing that had stopped them from reaching the next level?
Yeah, and Florida was dynastic. Like, I don't know that you would call them a dynasty, but they had the makings of something that was building into a dominant force in the sport because they had already won a couple of national championships. They
Hmm.
had a generational player at quarterback who was back. They went undefeated after a national championship season, and everybody kind of thought, well, this is another coronation for Tim Tebow, and Florida is kind of here to stay the way that Urban Meyer is recruiting. Now we know, obviously, in retrospect, like, and you can go back and watch documentaries about this, that there were things happening at Florida that were maybe causing the downfall sooner than expected. But we don't have to get into all that. But with Alabama, I mean, even the first game of the season against Virginia Tech, a top 10 opponent in that annual Chick-fil-A kickoff game, Alabama beats them by 10 points. The game was never in doubt, but that was Alabama kind of going into it and saying, like, who are we and what kind of hand have we been dealt here? How do we rearrange things and how do we figure out sort of our identity moving forward? You mentioned LSU, you mentioned South Carolina, Tennessee. Obviously, the Terrence Cody block game, they win that game by 2 points, and that's right before a bye week. And so they're obviously exhausted, and they get a really tough game from Lane Kiffin and that Tennessee team. And so, they it's not like they just mauled everybody. They were dominant at various points of the season, but Auburn, the Iron Bowl, that was a tough game. Obviously, before a week before the SEC championship game, they get out of Auburn alive with a last minute drive to take the lead and win that. And so this is a team that has been battle tested. And so what you hear later in the game, or really after the game, was it was all building up towards this moment. It was all about getting back to this game, to getting Florida again. They wanted the rematch. They had the chip on their shoulder. And, if a team is talented enough, they often have an advantage going into a rematch, a revenge game like that, where it's all they care about. And so, Matt, I mean, this was Saturday, December 5th, 2009, the SEC title game in the Georgia Dome, but this was before Mercedes-Benz Stadium. A 3 p.m. kick. CBS broadcast the game. Our buddy Vern Lundquist and Gary Danielson on the call, Tracy Wolfson on the sideline. There's this really cool package that opens it with Gene Stallings and Steve Spurrier building it up. Those two obviously coached each other in the first ever SEC title game played between Alabama and Florida. And Matt, they've played, I think, 42 times now. Alabama leads the series 27-14. That math doesn't add up. But anyway, I think Alabama has a significant advantage. They played 10 times in the SEC championship game. Alabama winning 6 of those, some classic battles, including 2008 and 2009. We've had 2 Alabama-Florida games in this countdown so far. This is our third. Matt, what are your thoughts on the Alabama-Florida rivalry? Can you call it a rivalry?
Well, I would say I would put it in the same bucket as some of these other sort of situational rivalries, let's say. Like, it existed in a place and time. And I think Alabama, Florida was such a cool stretch of games. And I would probably separate it from what they did in the 90s. I mean, obviously there was some history there, but I think you go back and specifically really look at those games that happened in the SEC championship games and a few in the regular season, between Saban and Urban Meyer, and maybe a couple of the coaches that followed Meyer, but obviously it started to fall off after that. I think in a lot of ways it was a rivalry between Saban and Meyer more so than anything else. But I also think of, I think it's right up there with the sort of mini rivalry, you could say, between Alabama and Clemson in the 2010s, in that it was 2 programs who both happened to be at the top and they couldn't avoid each other at the end of the season. And I think probably the expanded playoff is going to make things like that less likely to happen, and I think probably that's what people wanted because they got tired of seeing these repeated rematches between Alabama and Florida, Alabama and Clemson, Alabama and Georgia. There's a common element there in all of those, but I mean, they are. I like that, and to me, it's the thing that's most like the NFL about college football, at least in the last 20, 30 years, is that you get these sort of 2 teams that they're good for a reason, right? They didn't luck their way there. They're very good. They have things down to a science, and they're going to go on a run, a multi-year run of being great, and they're always going to end up finding each other at some point. I really like that, and I like it at both levels. I like it when we see it in Super Bowl rematches too.
Yeah, it's a battle for the conference supremacy in Alabama, Florida. It's so cool that they would often meet at the summit of the mountain, right? Like that they would be playing for the
And,
SEC championship.
and I got to say, just a quick note on this. I mean, you mentioned the broadcast. One thing I think they did a tremendous job of with this broadcast is crowd atmosphere, the miking the crowd, let it like whoever produced the sound on this broadcast. When you go back and watch it, you can hear how unbelievably intense this crowd is. And that I think it still holds true for the new stadium too, by the way. I think for big games there, you get a little bit of this still. But man, when you would get an evenly matched game in the Georgia Dome for an SEC championship game, it's some of the best atmospheres I've ever seen. And this game, you can every single play, it's loud in there. There it must have been a pretty even split between the two fan bases.
Well, and it's a helmet game, right? It's one of those like classic games dating back to the early '90s in terms of the history of the SEC championship game, but it's just good for college football and good for the SEC when Alabama and Florida are competing at this level, I think. And I honestly I hate that Florida played in alternate uniforms in this game, and they wore those stupid white helmets with the F on the side of them instead of their regular orange helmet or whatever. Like to me, it's just like those two uniforms look good on the field at the same time. But this was Nick Saban's third season as the Alabama coach. They're coming off of the 2008 season when they had an undefeated regular season. They lose to Florida in the SEC game. They go on to get humiliated by Utah in the Sugar Bowl. You can call it a meaningless bowl game after falling short of their true aspirations of winning a national title, or you can call it that they flat out got beat by Utah. Matt, that Sugar Bowl was not on this list of the greatest games of the last 25 years. But real quick, do you believe in the meaningless bowl game factor theory, or does that only work when Alabama loses a postseason game without championship implications?
Well, I do think you can notice a pattern with it, but I mean I think in that case Alabama was so deflated after losing to Florida in that SEC championship game in '08, and it's whether Alabama had beaten Utah or not, I actually think they would have felt similarly disappointed in the season. I don't think beating Utah was going to be a fix. I don't think it was going to give anybody better feelings about what had happened that season because it felt like a huge blown opportunity. It felt like falling short of the potential of that team. And in some ways, I feel like it's appropriate that it ended the way it did. And look, I'm not trying to take anything away from Utah, but I think that if that Alabama team was playing for the same stakes they were playing for in that SEC championship game, I think the result of the game would have been different. I'm comfortable saying that.
I mean, look, I think you first give credit to Utah because they showed up to play, and whoever they were supposed to play didn't. And
It
whether or
was a
not they
huge
did or didn't,
The
they
stakes for
won.
them were
Right.
very high because it was a moment to establish the legitimacy of their program. And guess what? It did. And that game got them into the Pac 12, which, hey, well, congrats. That lasted a little while at least.
Well, these SEC championship games involving Alabama, particular years 08, 09, 2012, like they seem like de facto semifinals for the national
Absolutely.
championship game. And a lot of people thought whoever wins this game, not only are they going to the national title game, but they're probably going to win it. It happened to be the case those years. Most people thought if Alabama beats Florida, they go on to beat Oklahoma. If Florida beats Alabama, they probably go on to beat Texas. If Georgia beats Alabama, they probably go on to beat Notre Dame. That's just the way people felt about the SEC at this time.
There was a 6 year stretch that the winner of not the winner of the SEC championship because of 2011, Alabama broke that up. But for 6 years in a row, an SEC team won the national championship, and that streak was only broken by Auburn losing to Florida State in 2013. And I just am stating facts.
Yeah,
But
well, I've been out of shape about that one.
the I mean the gap between the SEC and everybody else was very obvious at this period. And you just can go back and look at these national title games from this stretch, and the only one of them that was even competitive was 2011, and it was because it was Alabama and LSU rematching.
So Tim Tebow and Urban Meyer, they got them in 2008. That was their second national title run together after 2006, and it looked like a third could be imminent. Florida was a hotbed of talent. They were on a roll. Like Alabama, they were a total recruiting machine. They were undefeated going into the season, going into the postseason. They were looking to send Tim Tebow off with a third title. Let's focus on Tebow for just a minute, Paul. Our good friend Paul Feinbaum recently talked about Arch Manning, and he sort of labeled Arch Manning kind of the new Tim Tebow in a way, or at least he drew a comparison saying that he's sort of like the most talked about, scrutinized, and maybe even the best quarterback prospect since Tim Tebow in college football. I think he's talking more than on the field talent because, there's a level of interest in him and his prospects as the quote unquote next great quarterback, the same way that Tebow kind of transcended the sport. What do you remember about Tim Tebow in his playing days at Florida?
Well, I think first of all, Paul, I would never want to second guess him because his perspective is a lot greater than mine. But yeah, I mean, Arch's hype is entirely based on potential and name and aura, I guess. Whereas Tebow's really truly was only ever based on his ability. He was a phenomenal high school player. I mean, it was an undefendable high school quarterback. There was nothing anybody can do. It's one of those highlight reels, if you go back and watch, that is on the level of Derrick Henry's, where it's just like, this guy should not be allowed to play high school football. I don't care how old he is. But I mean, Tebow was. It's not like it was all hype. I don't think there was ever a moment, maybe as a freshman, where people might have thought this guy, it's all hype. He's going to get brought down to earth. I mean, he was just always had the goods. And it was more than just playing ability, too. Like we've now seen, if you ever watch locker room video, practice video of Tim Tebow, he's a very unusual person in that he has this infectious positivity that could not help but bring up the morale of other people around him. Very, very different from sort of even the average superstar quarterback who often have big egos and are sort of, you want to use like the alpha stereotype where they have people's respect, but part of how they get it is, you have to be like feared a little bit and you have to demand it from people. Like Tebow was not that way at all. He was a lead from the front guy, and he was constantly encouraging his teammates. He was just sort of this huge ball of positivity. And I think Bama fans, obviously, and a lot of other people got sick of him in part because he was incredibly difficult to play against and to defend. Just this huge body that was very difficult to stop running, and also had, and you can see some of it in this game, his ability to improvise. In a lot of ways, he kind of feels like if Bryce Young was in a linebacker's body, you know, it that rewatching this game, that's what it felt like. He has some of those, that recognition of, this is a broken play. I've taken off running, but I can see that somebody has now come open and I can whip the ball to them. And it's so frustrating to defend against. And I mean, he was, I would say, one of the all-time great college quarterbacks.
Yeah, or he could absorb the contact if he kept the ball, right?
Yeah,
And he
tough,
could just
tough to hurt too. Yeah,
keep doing it, and he could wear defenses down, and he was tough, and he was great. And you mentioned the positivity part of it. I forget which Alabama players said this, but I remember them saying that it was tough to break Tebow mentally because you'd be talking trash, you'd be dropping profanity at him, but he would just keep getting up and saying God bless, and they were just like, "What do you do to that? Like, what do you do with this? I don't know what to do with this." And so that was just a mark of like his
Great tackle,
personality.
man. As
Yeah,
they pull him back up. Yeah.
yeah. So Alabama has another undefeated regular season. It's built on a dominant defense, a balanced pro style offense. Back when they ran the damn ball behind arguably their best backfield ever, Heisman favorite Mark Ingram, freshman sensation Trent Richardson, and a really underrated third string guy in Roy Upchurch.
That feels like
They,
that's going to be a future episode debate, Ben.
oh
Best
man,
backfield ever. It's a
I
really
think
good
so.
one, though.
I mean, Ingram obviously would have been Alabama's first ever Heisman winner at the time. So this was an award that had eluded Alabama, and they were never really in the conversation to compete for it, let alone win it. And Alabama fans had adopted this attitude: we don't need a Heisman, we want championships. And that soon changed, obviously. But Ingram was such a cool story. I mean, he was part of the 2008 recruiting class. He wasn't thought to be a future Heisman winner or a first round draft pick. He was a tough runner. He's from Flint, Michigan. He plays well his freshman season. He's running behind Glenn Coffey. But Jim McElwain essentially builds an entire offense around him his sophomore season, and he becomes the face and really truly a pioneer of that run the damn ball mentality that Alabama fans love. And I just want you, Matt, to help people remember who Mark Ingram was as a character during this 2009 season.
Well, I actually don't think we had a great understanding of what his personality was like yet. I think that started to emerge almost for me. I mean, even somebody that covered the team and followed it, I think he came out of his shell a little bit as a pro, and we started to see what a fun guy he is. But in college, he was just an enormously talented running back with an NFL pedigree. You'll hear them mention the story of his dad multiple times during this broadcast if you watch it. They also compare him an awful lot to Emmett Smith during this broadcast, and I think it's interesting that sort of the trope, I guess, that people recognized very quickly about Ingram was difficult to bring down, right? Like, uh, uh, great at turning potential tackles into something he can make a move off of and continue. And he has multiple long runs in this game. And that, I mean, explosive plays was the term that Nick Saban liked to use all the time. And Mark Ingram was built for that. He was not the biggest guy, um, but as part of a stable of backs, and if you limit his carries, you would often see Ingram start to come up with these explosive plays in the second half of games, and he definitely has some of those here. There's one that in particular in this game coming off of a Florida touchdown, where maybe they're showing some signs of life still in the game. Ingram reels off, I think, something like a 70-yard run, and it looks like he should have been tackled almost immediately, but he turns it into a huge explosive play. And I mean, that's an emotional backbreaker for the opponent when something like that happens. You've just scored a touchdown. You think maybe we can get a stand here and keep them out and get back in this thing. And now he's reeling off this play where they're immediately in scoring position.
Yards after contact was a stat that a lot of people became intimately familiar with because of Mark Ingram this season. He's a guy that was really difficult to bring down. He was fast. He could catch the ball out of the backfield. I think more than anything, what he embodies for me when I look back at the Saban era was relentless competitor. That was a term that Nick Saban liked to use, and he used at the end of this game or at the beginning of this game or halftime or whenever he talked to Tracy Wolfson. But Mark Ingram was that. Like, he was the hateful competitor that Saban has also labeled his past players. He was somebody who just really wanted to win, and you could see it in the way that he played. But he was a leader on this team, and he was just a guy that broke out because of how hard he played. And I think that that rubbed off on the rest of this team.
And one thing that's unique about this team as I watch it, obviously there's a number one recruiting class that has come in and are freshmen in this team, and they make or freshmen and sophomores, and they make a huge impact on this game, and they're all over the place in this game. But a lot of the key players in this game for Alabama, some of a number of them predate Saban and were Shula recruits, but also a lot of them are guys that I guess I think of as sort of underdog type players, which is a weird thing to say about Alabama, especially an undefeated team that won a national championship. But they're not the kind of guys who would have ended up at Alabama maybe 5, 7, 10 years after this. And I think Greg McElroy is a great example of that. You know, a guy who basically almost never played in high school because he had a future star ahead of him on the roster, but comes up huge in this game. And you know, I think Roy Upchurch again, a guy that kind of had a very up and down career at Alabama. He plays a crucial role in this game and has some very big plays. And Marquise Mays is another one, Ben, that I think he was a relatively highly regarded recruit, but he was not Julio Jones. There was not some huge hype machine around Marquise Mays. He's arguably the most important part of the passing game in this game for Alabama. I mean, he is constantly coming up with big plays in this game.
Well, let's get to the game. Both teams are undefeated, as we've mentioned. Florida is ranked number 1. Alabama is ranked number 2. As Vern points out, two teams being undefeated had never happened before in the SEC championship when they're facing off against each other in the SEC championship. So the stakes are really high. The winner goes to the BCS championship game. The Heisman Trophy is on the line. Whoever has the better game between Ingram and Tebow probably wins it, even though you had guys like Colt McCoy and we'd learn later Toby Gerhart lurking. But the broadcast points out, too, that Florida defensive end Carlos Dunlap is suspended for the game after a DUI arrest. So that's part of the narrative. I just want to remind people. But right before kickoff, Gary Danielson talks about the quarterbacks. And you mentioned Greg McElroy, Matt. He talks about Tebow's brilliance in the fourth quarter during the 2008 SEC game. And then he talks about how Greg McElroy has really flourished in the fourth quarter play during the 2009 season. He also mentioned that McElroy came to Alabama because Tebow ended up going to Florida instead of Alabama. And McElroy, he's got this reputation now, and even kind of had it then, as the quote unquote game manager, right? That label that, you know, some consider a pejorative for quarterbacks, but it became pretty commonplace at Alabama because of guys like Greg McElroy, who just, they needed to be solid, right? Like they needed to be the guys who knew the offense. They minimized mistakes. They took what the defense gives them, as Nick Saban liked to say, and they made the throws when they really needed to make them. Matt, how do you think Greg McElroy is remembered at Alabama right now?
Well, it's interesting because, as a lot of people know, Greg has since become a part of the media, not just as a guy that calls games for ABC, which I will say I think he does a tremendous job of. I think he's one of the best
He's really
guys
good at it.
in the game right now doing that. But he also is a commentator and has a radio show that he does with our friend Cole Kublik. Um, and so Greg, I think, has not been shy to criticize Alabama, and as is the job of an analyst, right? But it's not something that fans of the team you played for are going to always be appreciative of. I'll say fans sometimes, and we love all of you that are listening, but sometimes I think you guys are not fully aware of the responsibilities of being a journalist and a commentator and what all comes with that and the sort of professional standards that go with it. And that's fine. It's not your job to know that stuff as a fan. You should yell at commentators when they say bad things about your team. That's fine. But Greg, you know,
Don't mansplain what broadcasting is and analysis is to college football fans, Matt.
I think that Greg wants to be the best possible commentator and broadcaster that he can be, and he is never going to let where he played college football get in the way of that. And I respect that decision. I think that it means that some of the fans have sort of mixed feelings about him because of that.
I agree with you, but look, he's a national championship winner at Alabama, so he's forever going to be beloved by the majority of the
He
fan
certainly
base.
should be. I mean,
Yeah.
he's the guy that got them to the mountaintop the first time.
That's right, and he was a good player. He was excellent in 2010 too, throwing the ball like when they had to. A lot more was placed on his shoulders as a thrower in 2010 due to injuries and other aspects of like why that team wasn't as successful.
And he's not a game manager in this game. He
No.
is a playmaker in this game.
No, but I think to your point, and I give the audience much more credit than you do, Matt. But the
Shameless.
I think that's just what we call cheap heat in the wrestling circle. But no, I think the issue, and I'm sure Greg is well aware of this, right? That people would say that Greg, because he played at Alabama, he wants to emphasize his objectivity, right?
Sure.
And so if he needs to be critical of Alabama, then by golly, he's going to do it, right?
Oh yeah.
Because that's what an analyst does. And so I think that that's the perception. And again, I'm sure he's totally aware of that. But that said, I think he's a fantastic broadcaster. I think he's got a great
Absolutely.
mind for the game. And so, you know, I'd love to hear his thoughts on that. Sort of like the fan perception of
Yeah.
what he does for a living.
I
But
I,
yeah,
I am. I mean, look. We've talked about Gary and Vern before and the role that they played, and people complained about them for their entire run, but it's so nostalgic to listen to them now, and they're so great in this game broadcast. And I think moving forward, I think Greg is going to be that voice calling the big games on ABC as that becomes sort of the big game for the SEC every week now. I think he's going to become a sort of iconic sound of this league, and I think he's a great fit for it, and I think he's so good. It reminds me of Gary Danielson in a lot of ways, I think, in terms of pointing out sort of trends that are going on in the game.
that I think you and the Alabama fan audience can agree on. Tracy Wolfson talks to Nick Saban before kickoff. He does this, compete for 60 minutes, every play in the game, be relentless competitors thing, the Nick Saban speech. But real quick aside here, Matt, did you ever notice whenever Saban did a pregame or postgame interview with a sideline reporter, he would always stare into the camera, like he's like staring into the soul of whoever was watching. Like, why do I feel like this guy is like staring at me, and like I've got to stand at attention now because like Nick Saban's looking at me while he's talking? It's weird.
That's a really interesting point, and most coaches don't do that. They do look at the person interviewing them, and Saban always does seem to look into the camera. What an interesting insight, Ben. And I don't know what the choice was about, but it is weirdly effective that he does that.
It was like The Shining when Danny sees the guy, and he's like talking to his Shelley Duvall, and
Yes.
then suddenly he's like, Danny, I can't. I just feel like Saban's going to start talking to me through The Shining.
You can hear him. You can hear him in your head saying something different than he's saying on TV. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it's really bizarre. But all right, Alabama gets the ball first. They go 9 plays, and I was going to say Lane Kiffin, but Lee Tiffin hits a field goal. They force a 3 and out on the first Florida drive. They go 8 plays for 76 yards. Mark Ingram has a touchdown. Tiffin misses the kick. They're up 9-3 early, but you know that Florida's going to respond. Tebow finds David Nelson for a touchdown. Alabama adds another field goal. Then maybe the biggest offensive play of the game happens. Matt, you mentioned it. Alabama gets the ball in their own 28, and McElroy finds Ingram on a screen pass that goes for 69 yards down the sideline. He ends up on the Florida 3-yard line, and he runs it in for an easy touchdown the next play. Many called this the play that clinched Ingram's Heisman. Alabama goes into the break halftime with a 19-13 lead. It was really competitive until the fourth quarter in 2008, right? But I'm sure that Alabama fans are thinking, okay, we're up, but we know what we've seen this movie before. We know what can happen. Matt, did you feel like this game had a different vibe? Like, did you think like it's possible here that Alabama finishes the job? They don't give up this lead?
Well, look, you can certainly see in the first half that there's an edge, there's a difference. Alabama does not put them away enough to feel secure about by halftime, but you are already seeing at that point Alabama is finishing drives in a way that Florida is struggling to do. And they're both, I mean, I think one thing about this game, both defensive lines are absolutely hellacious in this game. And there are so much talent between the two teams on the defensive line. But the difference, I mean, and it's a very narrow difference, I think, early on. It only starts to open up later. But, it almost, I would say, Tebow has a little bit less help than Greg McElroy does. They both look like they're running for their lives. They both are under tremendous pressure. And I think a big difference is McElroy has more guys step up and make plays for him and helping him than Tebow does in the end. And I think that's the tiny edge that Alabama seems to get, and it expands as the game goes on.
But Tebow had his roommate Riley Cooper. I can't remember if Vern Lundquist pointed out that they were roommates in this game.
It's gotta be. It's gotta be.
Probably. But he also look. I mean,
Cooper, like Tebow. Ultimately, I mean, when I talk about getting help, Tebow is 20 of 35 for 247 yards in this game. It's a very good game passing wise, but it's all on him. If you go and look at the rushing yards, Tebow has 10 carries and nobody else has more than 2 on his team. There's just absolutely no ground help for him at all. And meanwhile, over on the Alabama side, Mark Ingram's got 113 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. Richardson chips in 80 yards. Roy Upchurch has almost 60 yards. So, I mean, it's the sort of, it all adds up, I think, in the end, that Alabama's got more help from running backs. They've got more receivers that step up and make big plays on third downs or just getting, fighting for extra yardage. It's the recruiting finally paying off, that Alabama has a little bit more in the tank talent wise than Florida does in this game.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. The dawn again, and in like almost the peak in a lot of ways of like the Nick Saban era is sort of like smash mouth football, where they're just going to smother you to death.
And speaking of,
there's nothing you can do about it.
Peaks, Colin Peak in this game also comes up really big, both as a run blocker, but also, I mean, that's what that touchdown in particular feels like. It's like, oh, now they got this too.
Yeah,
on top of everything else they've got. Now they got this guy.
A forgotten player of the Saban era. Colin Peak was somebody I loved watching, and there was not enough time with him. I wanted to mention a quick subplot from this era, the Chris Rainey, Jeff Demps era at Florida. I remember each year before Alabama played them, I would read, maybe it was like the CBS broadcast, or I'd read like an ESPN preview, and they would say, Alabama's defense is good, but they've never faced speed like Jeff Demps and Chris Rainey.
Yes.
And each year, I swear, they would combine for like 16 yards like they did in this game. They only got 3 carries between the two of them, unfortunately. Super talented running backs, but I just remember that, and I'm sure a lot of other Alabama fans remember it too. So the second half starts, another 3 and out for Florida. They're struggling, and Alabama's defense is just flying all over the field. And you mentioned Alabama scores on this pretty nifty McElroy pass to Colin Peak, where they fake out the entire Florida defense. He's just wide open, walks into the end zone, perfect throw from Greg McElroy, and they go up 26-13. And it's really starting to look like the tide has turned, so to speak. Tebow's struggling. He's fighting for his life. Orlando McClain and the rest of the Alabama defense, they've figured something out here. Alabama's prepared for this. Florida punts again, and Alabama puts together, and Matt, it's good that you're already sitting down for this when I tell you this. They put together a 17-play, 88-yard drive that ends with a 1-yard touchdown run from Mark Ingram. Just gorgeous to read from a box score. He ends the game.
Ground and pound as what they call that. I mean, that is, we'll get to this category in a minute, but I mean, that arguably a finishing move there for Alabama to do that.
He ends up, Mark Ingram, with 28 carries for 113 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, 76 receiving yards, most of that on that one big 69-yard play. He's, to me, I mean, and to everybody else, he's done more than enough to secure the Heisman at this point. You mentioned the contributions of Trent Richardson and Roy Upchurch. Greg McElroy is brilliant in this game. He's 12 of 18 for 239 yards. He's got a touchdown. More importantly, 0 turnovers. As clean a game as he could have played. He's making plays with his legs too. That sort of famous skip play where he gets the first down along the sideline, one of the famous plays of the Saban era. So Matt, a 17-play drive is the kind of deflating, slow death that very well could have been what we labeled the kill shot here. But Florida still had the slightest bit of life in them. Tebow obviously doesn't go down without a fight. He puts together an impressive drive. He finds Aaron Hernandez on this drive a couple of times. He's scrambling for first downs. He hits David Nelson for 22 yards, and they're on the Alabama 6-yard line. So something's cooking. Looks like they're about to score. but it was all for naught because this is where the game effectively ended.
Kill
Do you remember
shot
what happens? Yeah.
by
Okay.
Javier Arenas with the pick, and very quickly, I think, and I don't think it was after this. I think it was the turnover on downs after the following drive that we get the cry shot.
Ah.
But when Arenas gets that interception, it is the game is over and everyone knows it. I mean, it is the cheering starts in the stands. I was at a watch party for this game. Everybody in the room knew. I mean, the people were hugging, people were crying. That was it was over. And it was such a big moment too, because again, it was that sort of, I don't know that you want to say it was relief because there was a big game ahead of this, but it was a feeling of finally getting up to that next level that Alabama had not been to in 17 years.
Yeah, I mean, Tebow snapped it. He drops back. He sees Hernandez open in the back corner of the end zone. He throws a dart in the direction of the tight end, and Javier Arenas just pops up out of nowhere, snatches the ball out of the air, seals the game, and in the rest of the game is really just one big formality, right? Like Alabama goes 3-and-out, they kill some clock, and then as you mentioned, Florida puts together a little drive, but ultimately they turn it over on downs. Alabama runs it out, they kneel it. You see Mark Ingram and Julio Jones goofing off on the sideline, wrapping up a gator chomp. They're obviously exercising some demons there.
Yes.
You saw some players getting a Gatorade bath ready, but as the legend goes, I can't remember if this has been confirmed or not. Rolando McClain stopped them, saying they hadn't won anything yet. Save it for the national championship game. So Saban stays dry this time, mercifully. He'd learn the hard way in the next game. But Matt, I mean, you mentioned this. Uh, the clock is running out on the game and his college career. So we see what becomes this iconic image, certainly for Alabama fans, of Tebow kneeling in tears, being consoled by his teammates. Do you think that that's like the image that you'll always remember of the 2009 SEC championship game?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what I would say it'd be very early to call it a meme, but it was a meme. I mean it was. How many times have you seen it photoshopped onto a EA Sports NCAA college football game cover? It is one of. I mean, and look, I think in retrospect, whatever you think of Tim Tebow, even if you respect him and like him, it was just a sign. I don't really think it was about mocking someone being sad or failing. It was just that this was uh this was this colossal figure, this like mythic figure that basically represented the fact that Alabama couldn't get past this level, that they were hitting a wall, and seeing that was it just threw it into stark relief of like, oh, we're the bad guys now. We are the mythic figure that everybody looks at and says, how are we going to be able to get past them? It was a very significant piece of imagery because of what it meant about where Alabama was in college football at that moment.
All right, Matt, the MVP of the game. Who won the game, according to you?
I'm gonna give this to Greg McElroy. And again, like, not on paper, you look at his line, 12 of 18 for 239 yards, one touchdown, an additional 10 yards rushing, some of that backwards, some of it more forwards, but like, it doesn't show up on the box score how significant he was in this game. It's even some of the decisions that don't lead to any yards, even some of the throwaways that I think end up being very smart plays, whereas Tim Tebow is having to force everything and throws, a couple of interceptions in this game. But I think McElroy had a command of what was happening. His understanding of when he needed to make a play happen and when it was okay to end the play and let's get it back next time, was he's so poised, he's so collected in this game. And as you mentioned, three key plays that he makes something happen with his legs, I would argue. Two of them runs, the one down the sideline, one on that 17 play drive that you mentioned, where he sort of dives up the middle for a first down, rather than throw it into coverage or throw it away. And it's such an impressive run for him, for a guy that's just not an elite running quarterback. But a third one I want to mention, there is a play early in this game where there is a handoff, and I can't remember who has the ball, but McElroy then follows the carrier around the outside and throws a block. And to me, how much does that say about how badly this guy wanted it? And again, I don't think it's fair to say Tim Tebow was sort of selfish or anyway. I don't think he made the team about himself. He was far and away the best player on his team, and he had to make it all happen. But there's just something that's sort of an interesting contrast about, rather than being the guy with the ball, that he's throwing his body at a defender to block for one of his other guys. I have to think that makes a big difference if you're on that Alabama offense and you see your quarterback do that.
100%. And McElroy, bigger guy than you would think if you haven't been up close to him. So he's on the field with other big guys. He's got to compete with them. But that was not the last time Greg McElroy threw blocks for his
That's right.
teammates. I think he
his
had
last
a big
time
one.
on the field, his last
That's right.
play
In the Capital One
yeah.
bowl game against Michigan State the next year. So he was a competitor, man. Like that's what you want to see, and he was brilliant in this game. So you're right to pick him, and I believe he was the offensive MVP of this game officially. But I mean, like you could give it to Mark Ingram, like you could give it to the coordinators. Jim McElwain called a brilliant game. Kirby Smart had these guys ready to go. I mean, you had these defensive players like Rolando McClain just in control of the game. Mark Barron and Kareem Jackson playing at a high level. I'd probably pick Saban because, I mean, he finally just engineered the unstoppable force, right? Like it was all building to this team pitching a perfect game when it absolutely had to, against the dragon that they needed to finally slay to get to like the top of the mountain. So, I mean, McElroy is a great pick. I guess I would go Nick Saban personally, but I mean, let's get into takeaways now, Matt. Like, let's look back on just sort of like the aftermath of this before we go. I mean, Saban talks to Tracy Wolfson after the game. He says he's proud of the players in the organization. He gives Florida a lot of credit. He even seems kind of happy in this moment, which is rare for him when he hasn't won at all. And even when he wins at all, not always happy guy. Alabama goes on to beat Texas in the BCS championship game at the Rose Bowl. More on that later from us. But, the real reason this game is so high on our list, Matt, was, not unlike the Clemson game in 2008, which we've covered here. This was a moment of change, not just for Alabama, but really for all of college football. I mean, Mark Ingram, when he talks to Tracy Wolfson too, he says, quote, post-game, everything we did all year long was to beat them, was to be better than them, end quote. So, Matt, I mean, it was just truly a passing of the torch from Florida to Alabama in this moment.
Yeah, and they knew. In a lot of ways, I do think that having a team like this helps to propel a team to push themselves to success. I think that that's not to say that I don't think Alabama wouldn't have eventually become very successful without something like this, but I think they had this benchmark that you could look at and that you had played against, and you knew this is how good we have to be for us to get to where we want to go. And they worked towards it, and they got better, and they knew exactly how good they had to be in order to win this game. And they got the rematch that they wanted, and they had prepared for it. So in a lot of ways, I think it became an advantage for Alabama. And I think that you can look at other cases of teams that have done that to Alabama. I think there are a lot of teams who have said, hey, Alabama is how good we have to be. That's the team we have to prepare for. I mean, you could look at Auburn every time they play Alabama, right? They are preparing all year in some ways for that game, and it gives them an edge. And that's not to say Florida wasn't thinking about Alabama too going into this, but I think Florida their sights were set broader, and I think when you're on top, it's a little bit harder to focus in on somebody that you view as your inferior. And that would not happen again for anybody that played against Alabama after this game.
So Ingram wins the Heisman. Saban endorses him in the post-game interview to win it. In the moment, it seems like a foregone conclusion, but it's actually, I think, the closest vote in Heisman history. He edges out Stanford's Toby Gerhart to win it. Uh, Back to Tebow for a second. Wolfson also catches up with him after the game. He says it's tough. It's not the way he wants to go out, but he congratulates Alabama. He calls it a classy program. And in university, he says they deserve it. He says they're happy. He's happy for them. He says, quote, they were just better than us. He says, thank you. He gives his signature, God bless. Pretty cool moment to see this guy so gracious in defeat. I mean, it's obvious like it meant a lot to him, and Alabama fans and a lot of other people like make fun of him for crying at the end of the game. But, it shows some vulnerability from an athlete at that level to just express themselves that way. I think it's a pretty big reason also why Alabama fans love seeing him when, he rolls through town when SEC Nation has come through for the last several seasons.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is. He was a very important figure to college football, and I think Alabama fans can sympathize, right? Like having had this stretch where it seemed like you were the best at what you do, and you still accomplished a ton, but you have to go out on this sour note at the end. That's a bummer. I mean, I think with time, hopefully Tim Tebow looks back at his college career and says, "Man, I got to do some cool stuff. I won at the highest level you could possibly win at. Got a Heisman, got national championships." But the fact that I mean, like, very, very few people get to go out on top, get to have their very last experience at something being the ultimate achievement. And that includes Tim Tebow. It's tough. Like he said, I mean, eh, not too many, guy did not lose too many games in his entire college career. Um, and I think hopefully everybody has a respect for, if not Urban Meyer, at least what Tim Tebow was able to accomplish in his time in Florida.
He also had a winning record against Alabama too. Don't
Yeah.
forget that, because he wasn't the starter in 06, but he was on a team that beat Alabama, and he played in that game. So at least he has that edge. So Matt, I don't want to tease it like we're in the Marvel Cinematic Universe here, but there's obviously more to come from the 2009 season, right? Like, we don't have to tie too tight a bow on this conversation, but put me back in that moment right now where you're feeling a certain feeling, like between the Florida win and all the build up to the national title game. There was no playoff. This was still the BCS championship series. They're in the championship game. It would be a full month and 2 days before they actually played it. So there was a lot of hype. It took forever to get there. But Matt, were you convinced Alabama would beat Texas after dismantling Florida the way that they did in Alabama or in Atlanta?
I think I did feel pretty confident Alabama was going to win that game, in part because of how the Big 12 championship game went down. It was kind of controversial, and arguably, there were a lot of people that felt like Texas shouldn't have been there in the end, and kind of got away with something. And I think obviously Texas fans didn't feel that way, and they were extremely confident. I can tell you, I was in Pasadena that day. Texas fans were talking huge trash all day long. They were very confident they were going to win that game. And maybe that's just Texas fans. Maybe that's just sort of the general status quo for them. But I thought Alabama was the better team. But still, there's a lot of nerves going forward from that. I mean, in part because it feels like, when is Alabama going to get this shot again? You know, what if this is your one big chance at it? And of course, we didn't know at the time that they would be back in that game so many times. Uh, and so, maybe in 2016, everybody kind of brushes that off with the loss to Clemson and says, "Hey, look, we've already won a bunch. We'll probably be here again before too long." This felt different. This is like, man, what if this is the only time we get a shot at this? And the stakes were just so high.
More on that soon, Matt. That is number 6 on the list of Alabama's 15 best games of the 21st century. I mean, we're just like a rolling ball, a rolling boulder here. Join us next week for 2 more episodes of the show, including Wednesday when we hit number 5 on the list. We're in the top 5 already. I can't believe it. You can find Beat Everyone on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Matt Scalisi, Beat Everyone producer, thanks again for doing this.
Thanks, Ben.
All right, I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.